Hello and welcome to tutorial 168, and in this tutorial we're going to be using the price series provider with RadarScreen, and specifically what we're doing is calculating the moving average for a certain user input length for both the monthly PSP bar, weekly, daily and 5-minute bar. And then we're comparing the close of that PSP bar. So this, for example, this salmon colored column, this is the close of the monthly bar. This close, the close of the weekly, this close, the close of the daily, etc. We're comparing them. So for example, let's just look at this one here. If this is greater than that, we increment a counter, and then we continue doing that. If it's less, we decrement. So for example, the next one is also greater. So we've gone +1, +2. Then we go to the next one, +3, but then the final one is below. So we end up with 2, 3 minus 1, 2. Very straightforward. Whether it's useful, of course, another question, but this is just to demonstrate the programming principles, of course. So let me just show you what we have on the chart, and I'm going to look at a specific, I put in a CDNS monthly. We're looking at a close of the bar of 126.99. So let's see if we can find that chart. Okay, so here we have the CDNS monthly, and if we look at the bar at the moment, now that is not showing the same close. And the reason for that is that bar is still forming. So we're actually looking at the last bar that closed, which is this one, and you can see there the close is 126.99. We could similarly look at CDW, which I've got set weekly. And this column here is the close of the weekly bar. So 167.49, if we go to this chart, just move it into view, and we look at that bar, that's not the one that we're looking at because that is still developing. This is the bar that is appearing 146.49 in the RadarScreen. And then what we're doing is calculating the moving averages, and you can see here, for example, on let's just go to one of the 5-minute bars again, 5-minute interval. Then we have, for the minute bar, we have a moving average of 13,965.29. And then we've just using the standard moving average function, we've calculated that using the bar, the equivalent bars of this interval for 5-minute. You can see there it's exactly the same value. A couple of words about setup, and if we just go to studies, edit studies for all symbols, then you'll see that I've unticked the update value intrabar, which just means that it will be updated at the end of the 5-minute bar. And I've set here load additional bars. I've just set that to 1. That is actually quite important for this program. The other thing finally before we move on from this is if we go down to, got this set slightly awkward size, but if we go down to the monthly interval again, you will notice that the information for the minute and the daily moving averages are coming out as 0. The reason for that is the PSP, the price series providers, are quite clever. So the PSP does not reveal data after the bar being processed. And in this case, we are not processing this bar because we process at the end of the bar, the monthly bar that is. And that is why we're not getting the data for the minute and the daily. And so for that reason, what I've done is throughout this program, I've applied this to a 5-minute interval, and then you'll see that we do have all that information. Okay, so that's a little bit of background, and let's now go to the program, and I'll talk my way through this. And as always with using the price series provider, of course you can copy the program and reuse that as a template if you wish, but in terms of starting a price series provider, the best thing I think is to go to the toolbox, double click on the price series provider, then go to properties, and you can fill in the properties as you wish. Just change the values to the available values. You could change the name. For instance, we could change that to PSP just to make it a little bit easier. Put in the symbol. If we put in symbol, that is the symbol of the row we're looking at. Interval, we could say, okay, we want to have a monthly bar and we want to go back, say, a user input of length. So I'm just going to replace that with length. In this case, we're using length plus 2. And then having done that, we can go to, well, actually one more thing. We're also going to be using 2 events just to demonstrate them. So you can get those by clicking on the little lightning here and double clicking until you get the things appearing. Okay, so having done that, we can now go to the designer generated code. What you can do is you can go and just copy and paste the things that you want to use into your program. And having done that, you can then delete the component in the component tray. But in the meantime, we've been able to specify a lot of the code that we want. What these come across as fully qualified, in other words, they've got the EL system there, they've got the TS data.common there, they've got the TS data.market data there. And what you can do, as you'll see in this program, is by using the using statements, then you can remove those just to simplify code. So you'll see some examples of that as we go through the PSP. So what I'm going to do is just going to delete that extra code that we've just added just for demonstration purposes, which is here. Okay, so let's look at the code as is. Having used the technique similar to that I've just demonstrated, we're creating a method, and I've called it PSP_load. This method is returning a price series provider, and it's got 2 inputs, an int type, which is going to say whether it's monthly, weekly, daily, etc. And then for the minute bar, we're going to specify the int span, which in this case is going to be 5 minutes. So the code is pretty similar as to that created by the designer generated code, but we are using a switch to decide whether we're using monthly, weekly, daily, minute. And the big advantage of this, it tidies the code up so that we don't have the PSP created 4 times in 4 different places, but it just becomes a little more elegant. Then we're using a range of bars of length plus 2, as I demonstrated, volume, false, false, ticks false, real time true, and we've got it set to local time. And then you can see the things that set up the events, and called it the name of each PSP we've called by the get symbol name. We could distinguish that further by, for example, adding the int type. So in fact, why don't we just do that? So I'm going to put in plus underscore then we load the PSP, and then we've got this little bit of code here. What this does is force the PSPs to load. And that's what TradeStation seems to suggest that you put in there to make sure that happens. And then you return the PSP. So how do we call this method? Well, it's quite straightforward. If we just go down the program, and you'll see this area here, and we'll say PSP1 equals PSP load. Then we've got monthly in quotes, got 1 for the span, weekly 1, daily 1, and then minutes 5. So let me just verify that, check that's okay. So that is how we create the method and how we call the method. With in terms of the PSP state change, you might be thinking, well, if we're creating this all in one method, how are we going to distinguish between the different state changes? In other words, how are we going to know that the monthly PSP has changed and not the weekly, and so forth? Well, we haven't really used this, but what I've done is just shown you a way of doing this, and you can probably fill in the rest. But what I've done is I've created a variable in the method of price series provider, which I've called PSP underscore, and I've said that the PSP underscore is equal to sender as type price series provider. Now you can see the sender there. This is being sent when the PSP, or not when the PSP has been created, but this is part and parcel of that PSP. So this is sent when the event occurs, and then we can get some information out of that PSP. For example, the PSP underscore name. We could have also, incidentally, without setting up the PSP underscore, we could have just said sender as type price series provider.name. And then we can put in the state using args.newState.string. Let's continue the calculation. Now I've got the calculation running at the end of every bar. Because we're only running this at the end of each 5-minute bar, you could have perhaps made that slightly more efficient, but keeping this simple, I've just left it there in this case. And we're checking, first of all, that the count of the PSP is greater than length before we calculate the average. Otherwise we'll get an error. Then having done that, we go through and calculate the scores. This plus equals that increments and this minus equals decrements. And I've just been through that calculation. And then finally, we plot the averages and the PSP close and the score. You'll see that we've got, I've just mentioned the print statement in the state changed. So if we just go to the program, and you'll see we're getting that information printed here in the print log. And you can see when I use the name, the name gets the name for the symbol, which we've stored in the PSP, also underscore, and then we've got in the daily, that input into the method. So if you find this sort of thing useful, then please subscribe to the Markplex email list. And also, if you're watching this on YouTube or Rumble or Facebook, then please subscribe to those channels. Thank you very much.